for your reaction to that and where you think it's taking your country.
First of all, I would like to thank the FCCT for inviting me. I would like to start my remark by pointing to the headline of an op-ed today in Nikkei Asia. It says, Cambodia's destruction of democracy is unacceptable. Hun Sen's party dominated a rigged, illegitimate election. I think this is a good summary of what the democratic world thinks about last Sunday's election in Cambodia. Then the problem is legitimacy, which such election, which is totally illegitimate. How can a legitimate government be formed? So the transfer of power from Hun Sen to his son, Hun Manet, has no ground, has no democratic ground, has no legitimacy. So I think Hun Manet will not be able to retain his position in a dignified way anyway.
Thank you very much, Sam Rainsy. I mean, perhaps following on quickly from that, what will the opposition's strategy be when you're dealing with a government led by Hun Manet, who's a very different personality from his father? He's younger, he's Western educated. It may be a somewhat different form of government. What's your strategy going to be?
I don't expect any change, any improvement from Hun Sen to Hun Manet, because Hun Manet is younger, is more educated than his father. It is not enough to expect a positive change. Take the example of Syria. About 20 years ago, when Hafez al-Assad was replaced by his son, Bashar al-Assad. The son is much educated. He studied in England, he was a medical doctor, etc. But things have not changed. On the contrary, the son is actually worse than his father in terms of dictatorship, human rights violation, etc. Therefore, unless we change the system, we implement deep reforms, we curb corruption, we introduce transparency, and we allow the freedom of speech, there would be no improvement whatsoever.
Thank you very much, Sam Rainsy. Sebastian, if I could turn to you, because you've been such a long-standing watcher of Cambodia. What are your own thoughts, Sebastian, about what Hun Sen announced today and where it's going to take Cambodia?
First off, thanks for having me. And my only regret is that I can't be there in person. I think that it's hard to disagree with Mr. Rainsy that there will not be any immediate change to the way Cambodia is governed. I think that Hun Manet will inherit a political system that has a momentum and an inertia of its own. He will remain, to a certain extent, he will remain hemmed in and restricted by the system in the same way that his father has actually been for many years. The system relies essentially on keeping powerful people contented. It requires constant renewals of the loyalty of key power brokers within the CPP, within the business elite, and within the military establishment. And these periodic renewals of loyalty require resources, and those resources, in the past have come from the sale and extraction of Cambodia's natural resources and all manner of other sources that have, in many cases, had a very negative effect on the Cambodian people. And I think that, to a certain extent, Manet will be a prisoner of this system. He will have limited power to rein in its excesses, even if he should wish to do so. And I've seen nothing to indicate that he has either the will or the ability to push Cambodia in a more democratic direction. I think that this whole succession is a way for Hun Sen to enshrine his political legacy and ensure that it lasts beyond his own retirement and eventual passing from the scene. I think that the problem of Hun Sen that Hun Sen faces is that he's being forced to step back from a system in which he has made himself very much indispensable. And how to do that when there are no institutions, no durable institutions that could guide a transition of power is a huge challenge. And I think that the solution that he's settled on is a generational transition within the CPP. Essentially, all of the old guard step back, their anointed successors step forward to take their positions. In many cases, or in several cases, we have the sons of ministers gearing up to succeed their fathers in the same manner that Manette is succeeding his. And this, it is hoped, will preserve the delicate balance of loyalties within the party and ensure that the Hun Sen dispensation continues, for another generation.
Do you think it will? I mean, given the challenges Cambodia is bound to face, there are some pretty hostile global headwinds coming its way. It's vulnerable to those. The natural resources are becoming more and more exhausted. I mean, can you repeat the Hun Sen power play for the next generation?
It's very hard to say. I think that one thing that we can say is that the system is inherently unstable. There's no institutions it's not rooted in any institutions. It's rooted in the relationships between powerful people, and those relationships, by their very nature, are unstable and volatile and liable to change. Hun Sen's political genius, if one could term it such, was to maintain very successfully those balances and to anticipate sources of opposition from within his own party and to essentially buy them off. But it remains to be seen whether the system will approach the sort of the outer limits of what Cambodia's economy and people can bear, and also whether Manette has the political ability to manage this very complicated game of elite politics. I don't think he has his father's capability nor his ruthlessness. Political ability is not hereditable. It's something that is the product of one's time and life experience. And his life experience has been very different from his father. He's a scion of wealth and privilege. He's gone to some of the best schools in the world. He has not been hardened in the way that Hun Sen was by his involvement in the Civil War and then the Khmer Rouge as well. So it's hard. Look, to answer your question, it's very hard to say. But he has a lot of challenges ahead of him.
Thanks very much. Look, I want to take a step back from looking forward to the future and just have a quick look at the election that we've just been through, that I witnessed as well. Chandani, you've got more experience than most people have of looking at elections in this region. You chose not to monitor the Cambodian election. That's unusual for ANFREL. Can you tell me why?
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and as well as that, thank you very much, FCCT, for inviting me and also the organizing in just after the 3 days of the election. I think it's very timely. It is very important for that Cambodia people who needs the advocacy and also that the lobbying for future democracy. Of course, that ANFREL is decided not to go for election, not to observe the elections. That because that we know that first thing is that beforehand we know that the Cambodia election was not free or fair. While saying that, go back to the Cambodia, the last Sunday election, it was the 7th National Assembly election, was held on that Sunday without legitimacy. According to the National Election Commission, they say like 84% voter turnout. And also that today that Hun Sen announcing that he want to be the next, he is not going to be the next Prime Minister. He is transferring power to his son, Hun Manet. My previous speakers, they already mentioned about that, but going to be like if that Hun Sen become a Prime Minister. And also that official results will be announcing on the 5th August. And the new Prime Minister will be like getting blessings on the 7th of August. Okay, go back to that maybe like why we did not actually that did not observe the election. First place that CPP government, they prepared everything for winning or CPP government, and also that continues the power authoritarian regime. And first they amend the laws I mean the constitution, increasing that fine from that government amend the election laws, intimidate voters, political parties to control their freedom of expression. Article 171 election law increase the fine from the 1,200 to 4,800 for those who are incite others not to go for register to vote or not to go to vote or spoil ballot papers. Second one was the election law amended 142, same election, like political parties, they cannot do anything, they cannot say anything not to go to vote, or they need like a spreading the news of about like a boycott in the elections. And also that I think it is like against that the freedom of expression. People have to choose their what they want, and also that the first place that previous speakers, they already mentioned about that the major political party, candlelight party, was not allowed to being a take part in the elections. Media was like undermined, and also there's no free media, and the civil society engagement also not there at all. And maybe if I want to say about the election observers, mostly the election observers were basically coming from that government supported the election observers. There were very few compral observers. It is not actually that they plan to deploy that 10,000 observers. Lately they scaled down that because they know nothing to see. And also that they call like international observers, but unfortunately there was no legitimate or the credible election or international observers. They label like international observers. Who are they? Election officials from India, Philippines, Russia, Thailand, and Myanmar junta appointed Myanmar Election Commission, and also the Timor-Leste. And Maldives also, we saw that Maldives after the, actually those are the visitors program. They come for 3 days. They just coming and visiting, and also that going to the places, polling stations, arrange polling stations. Finally, Maldives come out and say issue a statement like supporting the elections and giving like a legitimacy. But unfortunately, as a credible election observer groups, ANFL and the EU and other groups, we cannot go and observe such kind of arrange or the plan elections. That's why we step back, boycott the election, not to observe.
Chandani, can I quickly ask, do you believe, based on the lack of credible observers, that we should question the results that are given by the Cambodian Election Commission, that it's possible those results are not accurate?
Yes or no, yes and no also answer. And also we don't know what happened and that. And also the election commission, go back to the election commission, it's totally appointed by the CPP government. There's no other is an independent election commission in that sense that maybe like there's no way to say like this election was like a legitimate election because of we were not there, and also the legitimate election commission are there. Mostly that election observers are the like we call zombies, the fake observers.
Thanks very much. Darren, if I can just turn to you. Look, you know, there are very many repressive societies in Southeast Asia, some extreme. You know, you can think of Vietnam, where there's almost no political freedom, Myanmar, where there's this horrific civil war. In Cambodia, it seems, you know, there's a little bit of room for maneuver. Give us a sense of how constrained freedoms are now, particularly compared to what people would have experienced 20 years ago.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you to the FCCT for inviting us to be a part of this panel. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Commission of Jurists. We are a human rights and rule of law organization. We have our office here in Bangkok, but we're headquartered in Geneva. So I would like to discuss today the human rights and rule of law situation in Cambodia in relation to the elections. For us, the results of the elections were entirely predictable. We knew what was going to happen. I think the fact that on Sunday evening, it was reported that the CPP spokesperson had claimed that the party has won in a landslide, even before the final vote tally was made official. I think that's incredibly telling. For us, I think it would be very strange to imagine a situation where one does not win a landslide after having snuffed out all credible opposition through brute force and violence. So whether this general election was free and fair has to be seen within the human rights and rule of law crisis in Cambodia. This crisis is being further entrenched by the intensified assaults on the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and political participation. And just earlier today, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights just issued a statement expressing his regret that the elections were held in very restrictive environment. So in the lead up to the elections, we documented that there were mass convictions of opposition party leaders and members on spurious charges, the weaponization of laws that do not comply with international human rights law and standards against human rights defenders and the media, and also acts of violence and incitement of violence against perceived political opponents that were carried out with impunity. We are deeply concerned about this human rights situation, about the abysmal human rights situation and the democratic deficit in Cambodia. This systematic disregard for Cambodia's international human rights obligations has also been exacerbated by the lack of independence, impartiality, and accountability of key actors and institutions, including the National Election Committee and justice sector actors, including the judiciary. So I will illustrate these concerns in terms of the civic space in Cambodia using 3 emblematic examples that occurred in the lead up to the elections. So the first would be the revocation of VOD's license, Voice of Democracy, which further contributed to the decline of freedom of expression and freedom of the press in the country. So VOD's license, VOD is an independent media outlet in Cambodia. Their license was revoked in February this year in a process that we considered as arbitrary, which dealt another blow to the diminished space for free media in Cambodia. Without saying, an independent press is crucial for free and fair elections, and its closure had an immediate impact on national elections. We weren't very clear about the specific basis, the specific law that was used as the basis to shut down VOD. But from our research and from our interactions with Cambodian lawyers, we believe it to be the sub-decree on organizing and function of the Ministry of Information. And just a week before the elections, it was also reported that online access to several media outlets were cut. This included Radio Free Asia, Cambodia Daily, and Kamnotra. What is clear for us is that the revocation and blocking process lacked transparency with no clear avenue for appeal. The Information Ministry in this case has sole authority to allocate and revoke media licenses and block access to the websites of media outlets. And as the ICJ has repeatedly emphasized, these extrajudicial practices are incompatible with international law and standards and the rule of law. The crackdown on human rights defenders and political opposition also persisted in the lead up to the elections, which seriously undermined the civic and political space necessary for free and fair elections. These were carried out through laws that do not comply with Cambodia's human rights obligations because they are vague, they are overbroad, and they provide authorities with virtually unlimited latitude for discretionary enforcement. They also impose harsh criminal sanctions, which are inconsistent with the principles of necessity and proportionality under human rights law. So some examples of problematic laws within the criminal code include Article 425, which criminalized the communication or disclosure of false information, Article 437 bis, the lèse majesté provision, Article 453, which criminalizes plotting, and the very, very often used Articles 494 and 495, which criminalize incitement to commit a felony or disturb social security. So the second incident which I want to highlight is the verdict against opposition leader Kem Sokha. And I think a lot of people have talked about it already, but for us, it highlights the politicization and lack of independence within Cambodia's judicial system. Just a month after the revocation of VOD's license, Kem Sokha, the leader of the arbitrarily dissolved opposition CNRP, was convicted under Article 443 on conspiracy with a foreign power. We are concerned about numerous violations of the right to a fair trial in the proceedings, including the unsound evidentiary basis for Kem Sokha's conviction. And for us, what this demonstrates is that the judicial system in Cambodia has been politicized and it lacks independence. And this is a persistent problem in Cambodia. There are instances where certain judges openly align themselves with the ruling party, which results in a serious compromise of their independence. And this is deeply concerning for us because it allows the courts to be utilized as tools against perceived opponents of the ruling party. And these concerns are also compounded by reports that indicate that there is a lack of adherence to basic fair trial standards. For instance, there is a high reliance on confessions in courts, often obtained through the use of physical and psychological pressure by the police. Additionally, there also appears to be a presumption of guilt in cases involving political opponents and human rights defenders, which further undermines the principles of fair trial. So the third incident that I want to talk about is the rejection of the registration of political parties by the NEC that I think my other panelists have already spoken about, and the undermining of political participation in Cambodia. So as we know, in May 2023, the NEC rejected the registration of the Candlelight Party and the Khmer United Great Nation Party for the national election in a process that we considered as being arbitrary and discriminatory. And so what it appears to us is that the ruling party is utilizing all the repressive measures they could to eliminate political opposition, which restricts political participation in the country. Voters themselves are also being targeted. Following calls from exiled CNRP leaders to spoil their ballots as a form of protest, the Cambodian authorities have then arrested several opposition members and released the names and photos of 40 so-called rebels for inciting others to spoil their ballots. All of this has been occurring against the backdrop of violence and threats of violence against opposition members by Prime Minister, soon-to-be ex-Prime Minister Hun Sen himself. For example, I think some of you may be aware, but back in January, he live-streamed a speech on his Facebook page saying that he will gather CPP people to protest and beat you up and send people to your place and home. He also live-streamed other speeches threatening to shoot Sam Rainsy with a rocket launcher and that opponents should prepare their coffins if he lost the elections. So as some of you might be aware, this resulted in the Oversight Board of Meta issuing a decision to Meta to suspend Hun Sen from Facebook and Instagram for 6 months in relation to the 6th January video. In that case, the ICJ was heavily involved in the decision. We submitted a public comment in that case that was cited several times in the decision, pointing to the poor human rights record in the country and highlighting how political leaders should not enjoy higher protections for incitement to violence and violent speech by virtue of their status alone. And a day before the Oversight Board decision, Hun Sen announced that he was going to be moving to Telegram. But what we heard is that recently, on 20th July, he's back. He has reactivated his account, and it remains to be seen whether or not Meta will enforce the Oversight Board's decision to suspend Hun Sen's account. And these threats, this incitement to violence had real-life consequences. Human Rights Watch documented that after those speeches were made, they were followed by a series of acts of violence targeting opposition party members. So what I've shared in terms of the 3 incidents just represents a fraction of the assaults on civic space in Cambodia from all fronts, as Prime Minister Hun Sen tries to set the stage for a handover to his son after nearly 4 decades of iron-fisted rule. We at the ICJ stand in solidarity with the people of Cambodia who have had to endure yet another farce of an election where their right to political participation and freedom of expression have been seriously undermined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. I think it's a familiar picture we all know. I hope that Sam Rainsy is going to stay away from any rocket launchers wherever he is. Sam Rainsy, I think I want to look forward a little bit. I mean, we have years more of rule by the Hun family. Your people working for your party, and I know many people who work for CNRP then went to help the Candlelight Party. I met some of them when I was there. They are working in very, very difficult conditions. What are the options for you in the opposition? You know, how are you going to deal with this succession and this extension of the ruling party, given the very tough conditions that your party has to operate under?
I would like to add one point. I would like to underline the fact that the counting last Sunday was done behind closed doors. For at least 95% of the over 20,000 polling stations, the counting was done behind closed door. So they can count the way they want, they can manipulate the way they want, they can come with the result that they want. So this is the point that is very telling, because when there is no independent observers and when there are only CPP supporters in the polling stations, they can say anything they want. So our objective is to challenge the authorities in terms of transparency. They have to be consistent. When they are so sure that they are being popular, that nearly everybody vote for them, why don't they open the electoral process, the counting process, to be more transparent? So then people can conclude that this secretive electoral process is no conducive to any trust. And as Nikkei Asia said today, it is a rigged and illegitimate election. So we are going to continue our fight from inside the country and from outside the country. the supporters, the former supporters of the CNRP and now the supporters of the Candlelight, they have not changed their mind, even though they are intimidated, afraid to speak out, but they have remained true to themselves. Like in Thailand, there will be another, we will form the opposition, the democratic forces will form other political parties. If they dissolve one, we will form another one. And we will push, as I have just said, for more transparency. And we are very encouraged by the reaction of the international community. It does not say that the world is concerned. Being concerned is not enough. The point is to take sanctions. So there are general sanctions, commercial sanctions, such as EBA. The European Union will have to consider the possibility of increasing the sanction. But more importantly are the targeted sanctions, individual sanctions. I think that this will hurt. This will hurt the ruling elite, political and financial elite. Eventually, this elite, which forms the entourage of Hun Sen, will be very angry against Hun Sen because of the policy, repressive policy of Hun Sen, and also the pro-China policy of Hun Sen. These sanctions will affect the interests of many people around Hun Sen, and I think that those people will, in one way or another, react against Hun Sen.
Thank you very much. Interesting points you raised there about the international reaction. Of course, we've seen statements from a number of Western governments expressing their concern about the election, but I think we all know that we've heard those expressions of concern before. Sebastian, can I come back to you and your own view about this issue of international pressure and how realistic it is? Does Hun Sen care? And obviously, I accept what Sam Rainsy says. It can hurt some of his cronies if their access to going overseas is limited. But I wonder in the bigger picture, and particularly in a geopolitical situation where the US is trying to claw back influence from China, what's your view on whether international pressure has much impact?
Unfortunately, I don't see international pressure really working. I think that any international pressure that would undermine CPP power in any effective way would also probably take its toll on the Cambodian public as a whole, with unpredictable consequences for whether what emerges is actually better than what is there at the moment. I think that the problem can be summed up in one word: China. Hun Sen has an international patron that has not signed up to the importance of good governance and human rights principles and democratic standards. China, indeed, is to some extent engaged in a project of undermining these concepts internationally, or at least loosening the consensus around these principles at the international level. Now, it is not doing so alone. It has many willing accomplices in the global south and in other parts of the world, including countries like Cambodia that have long, or governments like Cambodia, I should say, that have long chafed at Western admonitions to increase transparency and so forth. And I think that with this alternative patron, Hun Sen has an escape valve. I also think that the growth of Chinese influence in Cambodia has become a subject of concern in a lot of Western capitals. And I think there is currently a reassessment going on of the punitive approach that some of these governments have taken, even if they have not gone as far as Mr. Rainsy would have liked in the past. I think that there's an awareness in Washington, at least in some quarters, that continuing to punish Hun Sen and potentially Hun Manet as well will not result in the hoped for policy changes vis-a-vis China. And so I think that I think that there unfortunately has to be a reconciliation between hope and reality in terms of Western policy toward Cambodia. I don't think that Western governments should give up the hope of reform in the country, but I do think the political reality within the country right now needs to be acknowledged, and then plans or ambitions for introducing reform by some means need to be recalibrated accordingly. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I don't know.
I was just going to follow up. Is Hun Sen and his machinery of power in the CPP, are they willing to throw their lot in completely with China? Because I get the sense that in an ideal world, they'd like, good relations with a classic Southeast Asian position. I mean, is he willing to take that risk where he becomes nothing more than a client state?
Well, this is where the imperatives of political survival run up against the imperatives of having a balanced foreign policy. I think that Hun Sen would accept an invitation to the White House tomorrow if it were offered. Indeed, I think that Hun Sen is driven to some extent by an abiding resentment of the fact that he has never been acknowledged, or at least not to the extent that he wishes, for his, as he sees them, achievements, bringing peace to the country, helping end the country's civil war, returning the country to a state of normalcy and stability. These are all, of course, this is the CPP mythology, but there's a kernel of truth, of course, to these claims as well. I think that the Cambodian foreign policy establishment, to the extent that there is one outside of Hun Sen, wishes to have good relations with everybody. More investment means, a faster growing economy, which means more wealth for individuals, but also potentially more contented populace. I think Cambodia, given its histories, a lot of Cambodian leaders are very aware of the dangers of superpower conflict. The problem is that a significant improvement in relations with the West will almost certainly require gestures of reform on the part of the Hun Manet administration. And the question is whether he is willing or able to grant those gestures of reform. Hun Sen was very good, very skilled in the past at offering just enough legal reform, very cosmetic sort of stuff, but he would, unveil these big reform initiatives, make lots of promises at donor conferences and so forth, and that sort of strung Western governments along for many years. The question now that the illusion has to some extent been dispelled over the past decade, whether Hun Manet has both the ability or the skill to be able to bring Western countries along. I have my doubts.
Thanks very much. Look, I know that Sam Rainsy's got limited time. He's going to have to leave us within the next 10, 15 minutes. So if any of you have any questions you want to put at this stage, the microphone is there. If you are going to ask a question, can you please identify yourselves and keep the question reasonably short and direct. Have a think about it anyway now, because I think we will lose Sam Rainsy in the next 10 minutes. Sam Rainsy, I had another question that I wanted to put to you, which is very much related to what Sebastian was just saying, which is that, all of us who've covered Cambodia and the trials and tribulations of you and your colleagues in opposition have heard you time and again talk about, yes, the need for the international community to respond. But we live in a very different world now from the one where Cambodia came out of the civil war and there was this huge international consensus. Today, I mean, I looked at the statements from the Americans, particularly the Australians, but the American statement, they didn't seem very strong to me. And there doesn't seem to be much of an international community that is willing to sacrifice a lot to support you. I mean, do you accept, you and your party, that you're not going to get as much support as you need, that the sanctions are going to be very limited, and that in many ways you're on your own?
I don't expect anybody to support me, but I expect democratic countries to support democratic principles. Democratic principles start with free and fair election, which we have never had over the last 30 years. So I would like to see democratic countries be consistent and defend the values that democratic Cambodians uphold. And I am looking forward to seeing a democratic change in Thailand. The situation in Thailand will definitely affect that of Cambodia. When Thailand becomes a more democratic country, I think this will have a positive impact on the situation in Cambodia.
Are you disappointed with the international reaction so far to Sunday's election? Do you feel it's not strong enough?
But as Sebastian has just said, there is currently a reassessment of the position of countries and governments which have been very patient so far. But now they start to lose illusions that they can push Hun Sen to distance himself from China. I think the presence and the influence of China over Cambodia will continue to increase. Cambodia has become a military outpost for China, and this is very important for China to pursue her expansionist policy in this part of the world, of course, but in other parts of the world. So China, I think the presence and the influence of China are irreversible. On the Cambodian side, China's support is vital for Hun Sen. Hun Sen admires the Chinese model of government, model of society, with more and more sophisticated means of control, of repression. I think Hun Sen has already made his choice. He cannot afford to have a more democratic and more liberal system. So Hun Sen's siding with China is an existential option. And any liberalization on the part of Hun Manet in the future will make the regime collapse, because this regime functions through fear, through repression. It has its internal logic. If you do start by opening up the political space, by organizing free and fair elections, either Hun Sen or Hun Manet will lose any free and fair election. So they have to continue with their repressive policy, with the unconditional support of China, because China desperately need Cambodian soul to use it to strengthen the security and of neighboring countries. So I think finally the issue of Cambodia is not only the democratic issue, but also the issue of independence and neutrality of Cambodia. Democracy on the one hand, independence and neutrality on the other hand are intertwined. You cannot separate these two aspects. When Cambodia becomes a democratic country, I think Cambodia will then ensure that her independence and her neutrality be recognized and respected by everybody, including by China. And I think the fear and the threat that China inspired by using Cambodia, this fear and this threat will subside.
Thank you very much. Look, I know you'll have to go shortly. Sam, would you like to go ask a question, please?
Yes, Sam Wright, club member. It's a privilege to be able to ask Sam Rainsy a question. I had an uncomfortable thought when I heard of how the election was going to be run, about the real intention of the election, which was in fact to count the votes and to do it as a assessment tool for what areas are supporting and what leave blank ballots, what have destroyed ballots, what have marks write-in ballots, as an assessment tool for how to continue the oppression of certain areas in the country. And my thought was that this plays into their hands doing that kind of thing, and that the advice that should come from democracy people is everyone vote for the leader.
What was your question, Sam?
That's the question. Is that a possibility that's what's
that they're using the election to track where there's opposition and not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think before we go to even Sam Rainsy, Shantani, with all your experience of elections, I mean, is it possible? I mean, I watched the votes being counted in polling stations in Phnom Penh, and at that particular point, it looked like a fairly at that point it was transparent. You know, they were doing everything by the books. Is it possible for a government to use an election to sort of track down who's voting, you know, in favour or not, which areas are against them? I mean, presumably they know where there's opposition.
Yes, that may be possible, because that we we saw the news that the election commission printed 11 million ballot papers. That is that we know that 9 million the voters. That means like there are more than 1 million ballot papers they printed. There may be like some tendency for that maybe ballot riggings. But of course there were no credible political party agents. There's no credible domestic observers enough. And also there's no international observers that maybe we can see. And mostly that when you go to that the domestic observers that according to the election commission, they accredited 89,562 national observers. From them, they call like a 586 the so-called international observers or the label of international observers, 18 like a special guests, and also there are some media. And for that, 41,333 observers from the Union of Cambodian Youth Federation. They are like supported by the Hun Manet, the support. It's like a Congos, mostly that the government funding those observers.
This is not answering the question.
Sorry, what did you, Sam? I'm not quite sure. I'm just saying whether that's possible. What you asked.
Well,
I know
she's talking about observers, etc., etc.
Yeah, but she's giving a context as to whether it's possible for this to happen, because it's quite. I mean, all in any election, people know where there's opposition support. That's not unusual. I mean, you know it in the US. I'm trying to pinpoint what you're looking for, some kind of method by which they're going to target opposition. Or do you just want to hear what Sam Rainsy has to say about it?
Well, I want to hear what's that, but also it's not individual identification. It's identification by small sections of the community. And you put together a map of where rural people are, where urban people are, where the coastal people, city people. I mean, it gives you a sense of what you have.
Without seeing like there's no like a transparency, as well as there's no like maybe like a opportunity to that the opposition political parties, though the credible opposition parties, there's no opportunity for the civil society, so-called like a citizen observers or international observers. There may be tendency that may be rigging, and because that we know that they printed 11 million ballot papers.
Shanti, let me just quickly ask Sam Rainsy, do you fear that people who are suspected of supporting you or the Candlelight Party will face retribution now?
Definitely. Hun Sen himself said that he personally has identified 44 opposition supporters who have voided their ballot. And he said, come to confess and defect to the ruling party, otherwise you would be punished. So it is very clear. But the objective of the election is for the ruling party to remain the ruling party. And this year's election is the same, but it is even more important because it is the year Hun Sen wants to transfer his position as Prime Minister to his son. So for Hun Sen, he has to ensure a beautiful election. Beautiful means a landslide victory with no opposition in one form or another. We want to express our opposition to the regime by calling on our supporters to void their ballot, to spoil their ballot. So he did two things. On the one hand, he inflated votes for the ruling party, and on the other hand, he diminished, he minimized the number of spoiled ballot. But Hun Sen, I think he made a big mistake. It is counterproductive. He wants to have legitimacy for his son, that his son who will take up his position at the beginning of the new term. It is why Hun Sen resigned at the end of this term, and he wants his son to start to be Prime Minister with the new term. But the new term, as has been pointed out by most of the world, indicates that this election is not legitimate. It does not represent at all the will of the people. Therefore, it is a very bad service choice that Hun Sen gave to his son. His son will have legitimacy, not legitimacy, because this election is too beautiful, too fake for the world to believe that the regime has any more legitimacy.
Thank you. Let's get another question in quickly.
I'm Chalanthorn from Thai PBS. Before the election, I have a chance to discuss with Cambodian activists and CNRP members that living in Thailand. They are expected that if Moving Forward Party come to be a government in Thailand, they foresee that perhaps people who living in exile can, even they expect that you come to Thailand and go to Cambodia to have a movement in terms of political movement, but currently as a turning table for Thai politics, that tentatively Moving Forward Party will probably not be able to be in the government position. You mentioned the effect, the impact of Thai politics to Cambodia. How do you foresee the current situations of the changing Thai politics and that how will affect?
Thank you. Did you get that, Sam Rainsy?
Yes, it is a matter of principles. We support like-minded people everywhere, and our brothers and sisters in Thailand who are very close to us culturally. So we are watching the situation in Thailand very closely, and we are encouraged to see democracy move forward with the Move Forward Party. But I think the democratic movement will continue to grow in Thailand. And Hun Sen is very afraid of this. He said that he is worried about the victory of the Move Forward Party, because I just said that the democracy in Thailand, when democracy prevails in Thailand, it will help democracy prevail in Cambodia also. And Hun Sen, he said, oh, I'm very happy that Pita could not be prime minister. Otherwise, Pita would join hand and would help Sam Rainsy or the Cambodian opposition movement to achieve success as in Thailand. So I do not expect anything concrete on the part of the new Thai government, but I expect that they first stop expelling Cambodian refugees in Thailand, expelling them to Cambodia, because being sent back to Cambodia forcibly means that they would be arrested and face a long time jail time. So I would beg Thai authorities to respect the human rights and the refugee rights of any Cambodian opponents who have taken refuge on Thai soil, and to help the United Nations facilitate their settlement in a third country as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions at the moment? If there aren't any other questions, I will actually wrap up, because I know that Sam Rainsy has to leave now, and I think we've actually covered a lot of ground in a very short space of time. So my very big thanks to you, Sam Rainsy, somewhere in Europe. Nice to have you at the club again. To Sebastian Strangio, who came in at very short notice, late at night at Melbourne, for some fantastic analysis. To you, Chandani, and to you, Darren, as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.